Are good leaders born, or are they made? What we know is that it takes all kinds of experiences to lead, especially in the social sector. Welcome to The Ripple Effect. I'm Caroline Broadhurst, Deputy Chief Exec at the Rank Foundation. In this series, I'll be speaking with leaders from across the UK, learning what led them to work in the social sector and what shaped them into the inspiring leaders they are today. In this episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with Hannah Slogget, who's co-director and co-founder of Nudge Community Builders. Nudge is a community benefit society in Plymouth. Hannah and her co-director Wendy set it up to bring empty buildings in the heart of their community back to life. Hannah's passion for arts enables her to reimagine disused buildings in Plymouth in fun and interesting ways for lasting local benefit. But perhaps her greatest leadership skill is listening. First, Hannah tells us how it all started. Can you tell us about your education experience? What was it like and what did you like about it or not?
I really loved primary school and stuff. I moved around a lot when I was little. Like, my parents grew up in Plymouth, but my dad worked on the oil rigs. So I got used to moving around a lot and making friends quickly and all of that sort of stuff. As I went on, I realised that I wasn't that academic. I'm a real practical person. I'm a good all-rounder and quite kind of creative. But yeah, by the time it got to like A-levels and kind of going any further, I was finding that quite tricky. I went to uni, but I'm just not into that kind of way of learning, really.
And you said about the creative sector, that you really like being a creative. Where did that come from, do you think?
So I think it's creative in like the broadest sense. So I like being creative around problems, and I was kind of a bit weird at school in that I really liked like maths and chemistry, but then also art and kind of making things. And I think it's the mashup of those two that have kind of meant that I'm quite good at kind of problem solving and that kind of creative way of working. But also I'm really into like visually how things look. So I definitely use creativity to manage my stress levels. If I'm really stressful, I will make something really bonkers, and it kind of helps to manage how I deal with kind of really stressful situations.
And using that creativity, you said that you like to solve problems or issues. And what were the issues that led you to set up Nudge?
So Nudge is a community benefit society that is set up to take on empty buildings and to bring them into use for lasting change in fun and interesting ways. And we run some of those spaces, and we also create space for others to do things on the street and contribute to local change.
Can you tell us a little bit about the background and how it came about?
Yeah, it was a few things really. I mean, I'd moved back to Plymouth, which is where my family were from. I moved back to work at the museum, and then I ended up making a bit of what seemed like a left field step into the planning department at the council. And I got really interested in people's stories and people's emotional connections with place. So in the museum world, I was kind of collecting oral histories, and I did a project about the process of demolition of a block of flats in the city and what that meant for the people and what that looked and felt like. So when they saw their sort of bedrooms and houses torn down and all of that sort of thing. And then when I was in planning, it was more about the future of the city and people's role in the future of the city. And I think those two things for me came together in the local community where I live. And so that kind of mashup all came together in this sense that I felt like there was more that was possible in our community, and that there was some real injustice around the empty buildings and some of the things that we were seeing play out on the street that were really affecting people, and people that already had a lot of different challenges that they had to face every day. And so that sort of coming together of that kind of placemaking, the kind of history and the role that sort of the built environment plays with memories and connections and all of those sorts of things started to come together gradually, which ended up kind of leading to Nudge. So I guess there was kind of like career moments now that I look back on that led to me doing Nudge with Wendy. Wendy and I met at our local residents group. I didn't go to a meeting and ended up being chair. So I was chair and Wendy was vice chair. And through that, we just started to spend more and more time together. We'd go for drinks after meetings and kind of think through some of the challenges that we had and what we wanted to do. We were focused on Union Street in Plymouth. It's a main street that leads into the city centre, but it also cuts our neighbourhood in half. It's called Union Street because it originally joined the three towns together of Stonehouse, Devonport and Plymouth. So it has a real history about bringing people together. So the initial issues that led to us setting up Nudge were when we started to do the street party and people came out onto the street and started to ask why no one was doing anything about empty buildings. And when we looked into it, 25% of the street was standing empty, and it was having a real impact on how people feel, but also antisocial behaviour and a real kind of loss of potential of what could happen in all those spaces.
And I imagine it was a very courageous step to set up Nudge. What were some of the challenges that you faced initially setting up a new enterprise?
So we were both volunteers and I was working full time and was the main earner for my family. It kind of got to this point where we could see the potential and we could see that there could be a different way of making change happen. But as volunteers, we were almost doing like full-time hours on top of full-time work. It kind of got to breaking point. And so it was a heart overhead decision for sure, partly because we were loving like making very physical change on the street. We'd just opened Union Corner and we wanted to do more. But also partly from a career perspective, there was a moment when I was having my appraisal and we walked out of a cafe and my boss, at the time we were looking at Millennium, which is one of the buildings that we own now. I said, I'd love to kind of take on that building and get it into use. And he said, I've got dreams like that for when I retire. And I just looked at him and I just thought, nah, that's not me. And so there was just like these funny little moments where like things started to click into place to make me braver and braver to kind of put everything on the line really and to leave a job that's really secure and all of that sort of stuff. I haven't got any like savings or anything like that. So I ended up moving like my family around different people's houses because we put our home on Airbnb to try and protect a bit of income and stuff. So it was a really scary time. But at the same time, probably about 1.5 2 years before that, my brother died really suddenly. And stuff like that just makes you think, you know what, like there's more to life than just kind of climbing the ladder. And so there was a number of things that kind of came together that made us both ridiculously brave to like go for it.
You've been involved with some exciting projects through Nudge. Can you tell us what you've been most proud of thus far? It's still early days.
Yeah, it's still early days. And the things that we're trying to tackle are really complicated. But I am really proud of how far we've come. I think a lot of people say that, you know, there's been a lot of kind of false promises. And so I'm really proud that so far we've been able to do what we say we're going to do. Nudge now looks after 5 buildings, 3 that we own and 2 that we lease. So we started out with Union Corner, which is a kind of community space for people to make their ideas happen in a garden. We then bought the Clipper. So that was a 24-hour pub that had been standing empty and has now created 2 homes for local people and a space for our local business to set up. And at the moment, that's John's Kitchen and Mariam, who supports local Muslim families. And then we're sitting in the plot today. So that's home to 22 small businesses. And we took that on in 2020. We then bought the Millennium Building, which is an old 1930s cinema. And more recently, we bought C103, which was originally a coach building factory, but was also a nightclub before we took it on, and it had been standing empty for 14 years. I'm really proud that one of the main things that you hear kind of just out of earshot is that Nudge has given people hope, and the relatively small things that have had like real impacts on individuals that have kind of led on to them getting a better place to live or a better job are the things that are evidence to me that what we're doing is working, but also the reason why we do it, really, because it is about making that lasting change to individuals locally, things that top-down services haven't managed to really make much of a shift in over like 10, 20, 30 years. And then obviously we've bought some amazing buildings. So I do kind of geek out on the history and the design of the buildings and the opportunity that they create for local people. And that's really exciting, figuring out what that looks like and how they can be around, hopefully, in like 100 years, 200 years, still being in use.
Brilliant. And what you do, bring the local people and the physical places together. But what would you say excites you most about the work that you do?
This type of work excites me because it's real and it makes a tangible difference to things that you can see or people that you know. And it also has an opportunity to make a lasting difference over sort of generations and challenge how other people might be approaching some of the challenges that we face in our community. I like eating soup with people, like at Union Corner, hearing about sort of their experiences and stuff like that. So that real kind of grassroots, doing fun things out on the street, and then like visually, sort of physically changing the buildings. And then I like the other extreme of it, which is kind of the strategic way of working, like looking at whether we can change policies to make it not hard for organisations like ours to do what we do, influencing how funding and finance can work for organisations like ours, being bold with some of those bigger decisions along the street and starting to be more ambitious, because 25% of the street is standing empty. So I like the two extremes of the job, I think, and the way that we work.
And I can see that you're certainly leading the way in that place-based change. Is leadership something that you've always been comfortable with?
Yes and no. I've always been really interested in how to support others leading from behind. So I've always loved being able to get a team of people doing something. I'm less comfortable with front facing. Some of the things that we do in Nudge need to be, but we're starting to kind of realise that that is important and people want that from us, and it is a way to make some of the difference that we need to do. So it's a bit of a mixture. I've changed a lot since we've started doing Nudge, I think, but those are the things that, like, looking back over all my different jobs, it's always been about quite quiet leadership, really, but kind of having an ability to create an environment where people are at their best.
And how have you had to adapt to be comfortable with that public-facing leadership?
I think, like, when we first started, Wendy's like super comfortable in front of the camera. So there's something about like playing to your strengths. And and the bits that we like, whereas I enjoy more of the writing and telling our story on paper and all of that kind of stuff. But I think people have been asking as well, which helps. Also seeing the opportunities that can create by doing that. So the fact that it can make Nudge stronger, it can open up doors to do what we need to do, but also the number of people that say that it's inspiring them, either around the country or locally. I think that's also a really important part of the impact that we're making. So I feel that is something that we want to kind of continue to grow. So yeah, just had to step into it really.
And to do that, did you yourself get any advice or support from others to help you think differently about the way you work and lead?
Yeah, I've got lots of informal mentors. So lots of people that I meet for coffee and chat to and that I've known for a really long time. So I've kept in touch with inspiring managers that I've had that I meet every now and again and kind of just talk things through in different ways, really. And then new people that we've sort of gathered around us in Nudge as well, like that. It's kind of weird setting up an organisation like this because you suddenly don't have a line manager or someone to either say that you've done enough or that you're doing a good job or anything like that. So we've both found that really tricky. I had a coach last year, which was really good. I'm really unstuck some things that I was kind of caught up in. But I think it's really interesting, even just a couple of weeks ago, having a conversation with someone who runs private businesses and investments and stuff. It can be one sentence that people say that just sticks in your head, unstick something, and then you use over and over again. I've got quite a lot of people around us that do that sort of role for us.
So Hannah, you've worked in the public sector and you now work with people from the private sector and the business sector. Is there anything you think that the social sector could learn from others?
I think there's something from the private sector around how failure is seen almost like a badge of honour for entrepreneurs. Do you know what I mean? If they've had 3 failed businesses, they're not thrown in a heap somewhere. They're actually seen as almost more credible. And I think how our sector talk about and deal with failure and risk is still sort of rooted in that sort of charitable type approach. And I think that if there are any organisations that should be the bravest and the riskiest, it should be social organisations, and that should be rewarded and nurtured, because that's where the different kind of problem solving and innovation is going to come from. Whereas a lot of the structures that are in place for the social sector really make that really challenging. So I think there's stuff around that as a sector we can learn a lot more about. From the council, I guess the main thing is, so I was working in the planning department and I was working on the long-term plans for the city, and we were talking 20, 30 years. And what I experienced in the social sector is applying for funding for the next 6 months and having to demonstrate impact in a year and not a huge amount of reflection of the overall impact over a long period of time. So even for Nudge in 6 years, we've reported on impact to individual funders, but I don't know how many have actually kind of looked back, apart from Rank, because you've been kind of with us for pretty much the whole of the journey. There's not a lot of that kind of real sort of long-term reflection and recognition that it takes a long time to tackle some of the things that we're needing to deal with in local communities.
So if you could change one thing about the social sector, what would it be?
I think there's something around the trust and relationships between social organisations and funders. So the experience that we've had with Rank and with a few others is where you're having the conversations and really being very open around what the reality is like of running an organisation and making the change that people want to see. I think there's something around that. I was looking at the fact that we've now applied to about 35 or 40 different funds. So if you add up all of the time and the energy that has taken, and a large chunk of those obviously have been unsuccessful, I think there is a better way for organisations like ours to set out our long-term plans and ambitions, and for funders to think how they can meet with those. The other thing that I find really tricky is around how the social finance sector is growing around organisations like ours, and that it's often more expensive than actually finance that private businesses can access. And there's not a lot of challenge around why that is and how that should be. There's just savings all over the sort of work that organisations in the social sector are doing. And that whole way of capturing the total value is really, really hard to do. We all know it's really hard to do, but also we do know it's happening. Like if, there's someone that's living in the Clipper now who is now working full time out of the benefit system. There's somebody that we had through the RAP programme who, is now working full time in a private rented accommodation, having originally been in homeless accommodation. And so even the cost of those individuals is huge. And I just think that we need to find a more trusting way to kind of recognise that those impacts are happening and that it's worth different kind of finance coming around those opportunities.
Great. So trust in relationships, Hannah, brilliant way to end our podcast. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to The Ripple Effect, brought to you by the Rank Foundation and Purposeful Marketing. This episode featured Hannah Slogget, co-director and co-founder of Nudge Community Builders. The producers were Cass Denton, alongside Michaela Carmichael, Jane Morgan and Dominic Delargay, courtesy of the Feast Collective. Tune into The Ripple Effect